Harper Sutton didn't think twice before handing over her last crumpled dollar bill, even though it meant she wouldn't eat that night. The man sitting on the sidewalk outside the corner deli had a busted lip, shaking hands, and eyes that looked like he'd lost everything. Harper had seen enough pain in her own life to recognize it in someone else. "Here," she said, pressing the bill into his palm. "Get a sandwich or something hot. Okay?" He looked up, surprised. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said, forcing a smile even though her stomach twisted from hunger. "Take care of yourself." She turned and walked off quickly, hugging her coat tighter around her. Not because of the cold, it wasn't even that chilly, but because the ache in her chest felt like it might split her in half. That dollar was supposed to buy her a cup of soup from the bodega. But the guy needed it more than she did. At least, that's what she told herself. Across the street, Kingston O'Neill watched the entire exchange from the back seat of his black SUV. He hadn't meant to stop. He was just checking out a commercial property his company was considering buying. But when he saw her, this woman with fire in her eyes and holes in her boots, giving away what little she had, he told his driver to wait. She didn't look like someone who had anything to spare. Her coat was worn out, her backpack had a busted strap, and her walk was tired. But she still gave. That hit him deeper than he expected. "Who is she?" he asked quietly, still watching as she disappeared around the corner. His assistant, Lena, blinked in surprise. "You want me to find out?" Kingston nodded once. "Yeah. I want her name." Harper climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny studio apartment and collapsed onto the squeaky mattress. She closed her eyes and tried not to cry. Rent was due in 4 days, she had 23 cents in her bank account, and her last freelance graphic design gig had ghosted on payment. She'd sent 3 emails already. No reply. But she didn't regret giving that man her dollar. Not for a second. The next morning, Harper shoved on her fraying sneakers and headed to the same coffee shop she always used for Wi-Fi. She ordered nothing, just sat in the back with her laptop and tried to find more gigs. She was so focused that she barely noticed the man in the tailored navy coat step inside. Kingston spotted her immediately. Sitting alone at a corner table, hunched over a beat-up laptop, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her eyes flicked across the screen with quiet determination. He didn't introduce himself that day. Instead, he left a coffee at the counter with a note that read, "For the girl kind enough to give her last dollar to someone who needed it more." She found it 20 minutes later, blinking at the cup with her name scribbled on the side in neat handwriting. "What the?" she murmured. The barista smiled. "Guy paid for it and left. Said you deserved it." Harper frowned, confused. "What guy?" "Tall. Expensive coat. Kinda looked like he ran a country." Harper laughed softly and shook her head. She didn't know anyone like that. 2 days later, she was back at the coffee shop, trying to finish a logo design for a small bakery in Queens. Her stomach growled so loud it startled the woman next to her. She quickly shut her laptop and stood to leave. "Excuse me," a voice said. She turned, startled. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed like he'd walked out of a GQ ad. His hair was slightly messy in a way that looked intentional, his jaw sharp, his eyes a piercing blue. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "You forgot this." He handed her a folded piece of paper. Harper took it cautiously. "What is it?" He smiled. "Open it later." And just like that, he walked away. She stared after him, heart thudding in her chest. "What was that?" She waited until she was out on the street before opening the note. Inside was a business card, Kingston O'Neill, CEO, O'Neill Innovations. On the back, in handwriting that matched the coffee cup from before. "Dinner? No pitch. Just a thank you. Tomorrow. 8 o'clock. The Whitmore." Harper stared at it like it might disappear. She didn't know what to think. Was this real? Was this a joke? And more importantly, did she even have anything to wear to a place like the Whitmore? The next evening, she stood outside the glittering restaurant. Her thrifted navy dress clinging to her with the help of safety pins. Her nerves shot. She was about to turn around when someone stepped outside. "Harper." Her head jerked up. Kingston stood there, smiling. "You came." Yeah. I almost didn't." "I'm glad you did." The hostess led them through the dining room to a private corner table near the windows. The city lights sparkled below. Everything about the place screamed elegance: crystal glassware, white linen, soft candlelight. Harper looked around nervously. "This is a lot." Kingston leaned in slightly. "You deserve a lot." She blinked, stunned. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You gave away your last dollar to someone who needed it more. That told me everything I needed to know. Harper didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered before. Not like this. As dinner progressed, the tension melted. She found herself laughing, telling him about her freelance struggles, her dreams of starting her own design studio. He told her about his company, how he'd taken over after his father's passing, how he'd grown it from tech consulting to a multi-billion-dollar empire. I wasn't always rich, he said, sipping his wine. Grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Jersey. My mom cleaned houses. Harper tilted her head. So you know what it's like. He nodded. I haven't forgotten it. By the time dessert came, Harper had relaxed. She even let him order a second round of crème brûlée just because she liked the way he pronounced it. When he walked her to a waiting car after dinner and opened the door for her, she hesitated. I can take the subway, she said. I know, he replied. But let me do this. She slid into the back seat, her heart fluttering. As the car pulled away, Harper looked out the window, her fingers clutching the business cards still in her coat pocket. She didn't know what this was, but something told her it was the beginning of everything. Harper didn't realize how long she'd been staring out the window until the car pulled up in front of her building. The driver stepped out, opening the door with a quiet, Miss Sutton. She blinked. Oh, right? Thank you. The moment her boots hit the sidewalk, the weight of the night settled into her shoulders. None of it felt real, the dinner, the view, the way Kingston had looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the room. She half expected to wake up in her studio apartment with the ceiling fan rattling and her inbox still empty. The next morning, Harper sat on the floor beside her mattress, chewing the inside of her cheek. Her laptop balanced on her knees, the glow from the screen flickering as her Wi-Fi cut in and out. She was halfway through redesigning a dog walking services logo when her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Harper Sutton? A woman's voice asked. This is she. This is Lena Halvorsen. I work for Mr. O'Neill. Harper sat up straighter. Oh, hi. Is everything okay? He asked me to reach out. There's a position opening in our in-house creative team. Junior designer. He wanted to know if you'd be interested in coming in to discuss it. Harper's mouth went dry. Wait. A job. A meeting, Lena clarified, her tone crisp but not unkind. Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. O'Neill Innovations headquarters. I'll email you the details. Harper nodded before realizing the woman couldn't see her. Yes. Thank you. After she hung up, Harper stared at her cracked ceiling for a long time. She didn't know what stunned her more, that Kingston had remembered her saying she was a designer, or that he might have actually meant it when he said she deserved more. The next day, she stood in the lobby of O'Neill Innovations, clutching a borrowed leather portfolio with trembling fingers. The receptionist offered her a polite smile and gestured toward the elevator. 37th floor. The ride up was silent except for the soft ping of each passing level. The moment the doors slid open, she stepped into another world. Everything gleamed. Glass walls. Polished marble floors. Modern art installations that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. She didn't even have time to take it in before a woman in a camel-colored sheath dress approached. Miss Sutton, welcome, she said. I'm Lena. Harper shook her hand. Thank you for having me. Lena led her into a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. O'Neill will be in shortly. As soon as Harper sat, the glass door opened. Kingston walked in, his tie loosened just enough to look effortless, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms like he'd been busy building empires before breakfast. I hope you don't mind me bringing you here like this, he said as he sat across from her. I figured dinner isn't exactly the place to offer someone a job. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Is this a real offer? Or is it because of what I did outside that deli? His expression didn't shift. It's because I saw your portfolio. Lena found your website. And your work is good. Really good. Her heart thudded. You actually looked? I don't hand out jobs as party favors, Harper. I built this company by betting on people with something to prove. She exhaled slowly. I have a lot to prove. Good. Then we'll get along just fine, he said, pushing a folder across the table. Review the contract. If you like it, the position's yours. Her fingers hovered over the folder. Just like that. Not just like that, he said. You'll have to earn it. But I'm offering the chance. She nodded, unable to stop the grin spreading across her face. Then I want it. By the time she left the building, the contract tucked under her arm, Harper felt like she was walking on air. She didn't even notice that the afternoon sky had turned gray or that rain was threatening to fall. The next week moved at a dizzying pace. Harper started work at O'Neill Innovations on a Monday. Her desk was near the window, her team surprisingly welcoming, and the energy in the office electric. She kept her head down, worked hard, and said little. She was determined to earn her place. On Wednesday, she was sketching designs for a mobile app rebrand when Kingston stopped beside her desk. She looked up, startled. "You're settling in," he said. "I'm trying not to mess up." "You're doing more than that," he replied. "I saw your mock-ups for the PetLink project." Her brows lifted. "You're reviewing intern-level drafts?" "I like knowing who's worth watching," he said with a trace of something unreadable in his gaze. She swallowed. "And, am I?" He didn't answer, just smiled faintly and walked away. On Friday, she stayed late trying to finish revisions. The office had emptied out, lights dimming in the hallway when she heard footsteps behind her. "You should go home, Harper," Kingston said from the doorway, his voice low in the quiet. She turned in her chair. "I wanted to tighten the typography on the header. It felt off." He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. "You've been here since 8. I'm used to long hours." He studied her for a beat. "You ever let anyone take care of you?" The question hit her harder than she expected. "I don't know how," she admitted. He crossed to her desk, resting his palms on the edge. "You said you wanted to start your own studio one day." "Why?" "Because I want to work with clients I believe in. Nonprofits. Social impact projects. The kind of work that actually helps people." His gaze didn't waver. "That's the same reason I started my company." She blinked. "You build O'Neill Innovations to help people?" "I built it because I was tired of watching my mom break her back cleaning houses while men in suits ignored her. I wanted to create something that couldn't be ignored." Silence stretched between them, something unspoken hanging in the air. Then he asked, "Dinner tomorrow?" This time she didn't hesitate. Yes. They met at a small, intimate restaurant tucked into a side street in Tribeca. Nothing like the glittering palace of their first night. Wooden beams, wine bottles lining the walls, the scent of rosemary and garlic in the air. They sat in a quiet booth by the kitchen, and Kingston poured them each a glass of red wine. "Why me?" Harper asked, unable to stop the question. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because you're different." She frowned. "Everyone says that when they don't have a real answer." He leaned in. "You didn't know anyone was watching. You weren't trying to impress anybody. You gave what little you had because it was the right thing to do. That's rare." She looked away, unsure how to respond. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "You matter, Harper. Even if the world hasn't told you that enough." Her heart beat faster. She didn't pull her hand away. After dinner, they walked under the city lights in silence. When they reached the edge of the park, he stopped. "Tell me if this is too fast," he said. "I don't want to scare you off." "You haven't," she said quietly. He hesitated. "Then let me be clear. This isn't just dinners and compliments. I don't want to pretend I'm not serious. And if I say I'm not ready for serious, I'll wait," he said. "But I won't pretend I don't want more." She looked up at him, the wind tugging at her hair. "No one's ever said that to me like it wasn't a trap. I'm not here to trap you, Harper. I'm here to show you what it looks like when someone chooses you without conditions." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back. She didn't. When his lips touched hers, the world narrowed to that single moment, warm, steady, real. And for the first time in a long time, Harper didn't feel like she was bracing for something to go wrong. She felt chosen. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to choose back. The first time Harper stepped into Kingston's penthouse, it felt like entering another universe, one made of glass, chrome, and sunlight. Not because of how expensive everything looked, but because of how quietly it took her breath away. He didn't announce what the place was. He just held the door open and said, "I thought you might want to see the view." She followed him in, hesitant, taking in the sprawling windows that framed the skyline like a painting. The city stretched out before them in glittering silence, the Hudson catching the last blush of pink from the fading sun. "I've never seen the city like this," she said, her voice low. Kingston stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "It looks different when you're looking down at it." "I don't know if I like that," Harper admitted. "I kind of like being in the middle of it, mess and all." He turned to her. "You're not afraid to sit in the mess, are you?" She glanced at him. "Is that a compliment or a concern?" He smiled. "Both." They sat on the terrace a while, the wind tugging gently at Harper's sleeves. She didn't ask how much the place cost or how many floors it took to get here. She didn't want to know. She just wanted to understand why he'd brought her here. "So," she said, pulling her knees up onto the cushioned bench, "what's your real reason for showing me this?" Kingston leaned back, one hand draped along the back of the bench. "I didn't grow up with this. When I finally got it, I thought it would fix everything." "Did it?" "No," he said immediately. "But it gave me choices. And sometimes choices are everything." She considered that. "You think you're giving me choices?" "No," he said. "I think you deserve to have them." Harper looked down at her hands. "You don't even know what I'd do with that kind of freedom." "I think you'd surprise everyone," he said. "Especially yourself." Later that night, when Kingston dropped her off outside her building again, she didn't linger in the car. But she did pause before stepping out. "You make things complicated," she said quietly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Is that a bad thing?" "I haven't decided yet." The next few weeks unfolded like a dream dipped in adrenaline. Harper's work at O'Neill Innovations gained traction quickly. Her designs were being used, her ideas heard. She didn't feel like a charity case, she felt like she belonged. And somehow Kingston managed to keep a careful distance in the office, never once giving anyone reason to suspect anything was happening outside of it. But after hours, that distance disappeared. They didn't flaunt anything. He didn't pull her into back rooms or make grand scenes. Instead, he sent her books she'd mentioned in passing. Left notes in her desk drawer written in clean, sharp handwriting. Brought her streetcar tacos for lunch instead of sushi because she'd once said she missed the food from her old neighborhood. They didn't need to define what was happening between them. It grew quietly, like a fire left alone in the right kind of wind. One night, Harper asked him why he never mentioned his family. They were sitting on a rooftop in Brooklyn, a string of Edison bulbs lighting the edge of the railing. A friend of hers from college was hosting a small art show, and Kingston had insisted on attending like he wasn't the richest man in the room. He didn't answer right away. "My father wasn't a good man," he said after a long pause. "He built the bones of the company, but he broke a lot of people doing it." Her brows drew together. "And you?" "I tried to rebuild it differently, but the foundation's still his. That's why I like what you bring into the company. You remind me we can change the structure without tearing everything down." She reached for his hand. "You don't need to fix what he did to prove you're not him." He looked at her like she'd just said something he hadn't known he needed to hear. A week later, everything shifted. It started with a photo. Harper saw it while waiting in line at her usual coffee shop, a gossip site open on someone's phone, the headline loud and smug, "Billionaire CEO Kingston O'Neill's mystery woman revealed." Below it were two photos, one of them leaving the Tribeca restaurant weeks ago and another of her stepping out of the car outside her building. The pit in her stomach formed instantly. She turned and left the line without ordering. By the time she got to the office, the stares had already started. No one said anything outright, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations hushed when she entered rooms. A few side eyes from people she'd barely spoken to. One in turn didn't even bother to hide her whisper. She sat at her desk and tried to lose herself in work, but the words on the screen kept blurring. Kingston showed up at her desk just before noon. "My office," he said, voice low but firm. She followed him in, heart pounding. The moment the door shut, she turned on him. "You said this wouldn't affect my job." "And it hasn't," he said. "Not officially. Unofficially feels like knives in my back. I'm handling it." "You can't control how people see me," she snapped. "They think I slept my way into this position." He stepped closer. "Then let them think it. You don't owe them an explanation." She stared at him. I don't want to be a footnote in your scandal. You're not. I need to know this isn't just a fling for you. His jaw tightened. Harper, I've never brought anyone into my world like this. Not once. That doesn't answer my question. He exhaled through his nose, clearly weighing something. Then he walked to his desk, pulled out a thin envelope, and handed it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and invitation. To a gala. O'Neill Innovations 10-year anniversary celebration. Dress code. Black tie. Guest of honor. Kingston O'Neill. +1, Harper Sutton. She looked up at him. You're bringing me to this? I want everyone to see exactly who you are to me. Harper's voice shook. Then I guess I need a dress. He didn't respond. But later that night, a box arrived at her door. Inside was a gown. Midnight blue. Silk. Tailored perfectly. No note. Just the same level of thoughtfulness he always gave her in actions, not words. The night of the gala, she stood at the top of the grand staircase of the ballroom, heart-hammering. Lights shimmered across the marble floor below and guests milled about in gowns and tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand. Then Kingston appeared at her side. You're late, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You're breathtaking, he said simply. He offered his arm. She took it. As they descended the stairs together, the entire room turned to look. Some eyes were curious. Others calculating. But not one of them mattered. Because Kingston leaned in, lips brushing her ear, and said, now they all know. She didn't ask what he meant. She could feel it. And for the first time, Harper didn't feel like someone who barely belonged. She felt like the woman he chose publicly, undeniably, and without apology. Harper stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the understated diamond bracelet that had arrived with the dress. She hadn't asked where it came from. She didn't need to. The clasp fastened with a soft click, and for a moment, she let herself look not at the gown, not at the makeup someone had applied with expert hands, but at her own eyes. There was something steadier in them now. Not confidence, exactly, but certainty. A feeling she hadn't known in a long time. The gala was still echoing in her chest. She could still feel the weight of Kingston's hand on the small of her back. The way his body had angled toward hers in a room full of people who knew him but didn't know her. She remembered how some of them had nodded politely, others had glanced too long, but none of that had mattered. Not when he'd turned to her and said her name like it was the only one he wanted to speak. Now, 2 days later, she stood in the middle of Kingston's penthouse again, but this time it was different. Not because of the place, but because of what had happened that morning. Take the weekend, Kingston had said, stepping into her office after her morning meeting. We both need it. I still have mock-ups for the wellness app campaign due. I already reassigned the deadline. You've earned the time. She'd been unsure at first. Until he added, come with me. Just you and me. She had agreed. Now he stepped into the room carrying a lightweight duffel bag and a single envelope. We leave in 20 minutes, he said. Everything's arranged. Where are we going? Harper asked, watching him. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a boarding pass, her name printed neatly across the top. A private flight. Destination, Vermont. She looked up. Vermont. I know a place. It's quiet. No headlines. No watchful eyes. Just air and trees and space. She studied him for a moment. Are you trying to hide me? No, he said. I'm trying to give you a place where you don't have to brace yourself every time someone looks too long. The plane was sleek and filled with warm-toned light. Not opulent, just thoughtfully designed. Kingston didn't do anything halfway. As they took off, Harper leaned her head against the seat and let silence settle between them. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It just was. When they landed, a forest wrapped around them like a secret and a black SUV was already waiting. Kingston drove them himself, his hand relaxed on the wheel, the road winding through trees that caught the late afternoon sun in flashes of gold and amber. The cabin was a 2-story structure tucked between evergreens with wide windows and a porch swing that creaked softly in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something warm like cinnamon and old books. You've been here before, Harper said, turning slowly in the foyer. He set their bags down. Not in a long time. Why now? Kingston looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something unguarded in his eyes. Because I've been building a life that looked perfect on paper, he said. And lately, I've realized I don't want to spend it alone. She inhaled, her chest tightening. "You're not alone." "I know," he said. "That's why I brought you here." They spent the evening cooking together in the open kitchen. He chopped vegetables with a kind of focus she usually only saw when he was reviewing strategy decks, and she teased him about how he held the knife like it was a negotiation. He told her about the first time he'd come to the cabin, how he'd stayed up all night fixing a broken pipe with duct tape and ambition. She told him about the time she'd designed an entire website from her phone in a laundromat because her power had been shut off. Later, they sat by the fireplace, a soft throw blanket draped over their legs. He ran his fingers through her hair, slow and quiet, like he was memorizing its texture. "Does this scare you?" Harper asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," he said, "but not for the reasons you think." "Then what?" "Because I didn't expect you, and now I can't picture my life without you in it." She swallowed. "I've spent so long trying to hold everything together by myself. I don't know how to let someone else help carry it." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Then let's figure it out together." The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds and the soft creak of the porch swing. When she stepped outside, Kingston was sitting there, a mug in his hands, the rising sun casting a gentle light across his features. He looked up. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, sitting beside him. "Too well. I forgot what quiet sounds like." He handed her the second mug. "You used to dream about starting your own studio. Do you still?" "I do," she said. "But it's hard to see how that fits into all of this. What if I told you I've been thinking about that too?" She turned to him. "What do you mean?" He pulled something from the pocket of his sweatshirt, an envelope, thinner this time. Inside was an official document. Her name, a business license, the beginnings of an LLC. The name, Sutton Studio. Her breath caught. "You did this." "I filed the paperwork and reserved the name. You'll still have to build it, but you won't have to build it alone." She stared at the paper. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because I believe in you. And because I want to be the kind of man who helps you rise, not the one who keeps you tethered." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She didn't cry often, not when it counted. But this wasn't about breaking. It was about relief. About being seen. Kingston reached for her hand. "You changed everything for me, Harper." "No, I didn't." "You did," he said. "You reminded me that who we are when no one's watching, that's what matters most." She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "I don't need the penthouse or the bracelets or the dresses." He kissed the top of her head. "I know. I just need you to keep choosing me. Even when I'm difficult. Even when I don't know how to ask for what I need." He tilted her chin up, his eyes locking with hers. "I will always choose you." They stayed on the swing until the sun was high and the birds had moved on. And when they finally returned to the city, everything was different, but nothing felt forced. The whispers at the office faded. Her work spoke louder than any rumor. The studio Kingston helped her start began taking shape. Clients came slowly at first, then steadily, drawn not by her connection to him, but by her vision, her grit, her talent. She didn't move into the penthouse. Not right away. They built something in between, a space that was theirs, not his or hers. A home with mismatched mugs and paint samples pinned over the kitchen sink. A place where she worked late and he read contracts in his socks. Where they disagreed and made up and figured things out in real time. They didn't rush into a proposal. There was no second asking, no dramatic kneeling in public. Because they didn't need a second promise. They already lived it. And on a Sunday morning, in the quiet of their shared space, Harper reached for Kingston's hand across the couch and said, "I never told you this, but I almost didn't give that man my last dollar." He looked up from the book in his lap. "Why not?" "Because I was scared. I didn't know how I'd eat, or if I'd make rent. But something in me said, do it anyway." He brought her hand to his lips. "That something changed my life." She smiled. "Mine too." And it had. Because a single moment of kindness, a second of courage, had rewritten both of their stories. Not with diamonds or declarations, but with certainty. With love that looked like partnership, like respect, like showing up again and again. And Harper knew she would spend the rest of her days doing exactly that, choosing him just as he had chosen her. The day Kingston proposed, Harper had no idea anything was different. She woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the kind that softened everything it touched. The city below was hushed, like even it had paused to listen. Kingston wasn't beside her, but that wasn't unusual. He'd started his mornings early ever since the studio launch, giving her time to wake slowly without pressure. She found a folded note on the nightstand, not a habit, just this once, and a single line written in his bold, purposeful hand, "Be ready by noon." Wear the green one. She didn't need to ask which dress he meant. It wasn't fancy, just her favorite, a deep forest green wrap dress that made her feel like she was standing taller than she really was. She hadn't worn it in months. Not since the night she'd pitched her first solo project and walked out of the meeting knowing she'd won it on her own merit. By the time the clock struck 12, she stood near the entryway, coat in hand, hair pinned up with a few strands left loose around her face. She didn't feel nervous, just curious. When Kingston finally appeared, he wasn't in a suit. He wore a dark charcoal wool coat over a soft gray sweater and black trousers, less like a CEO, more like a man who knew exactly who he was without having to prove it. "You look like spring trying to fight through winter," he said as he took her hand. "Is that a compliment or a weather report?" He leaned in and kissed her cheek. Definitely a compliment. He didn't tell her where they were going. He just led her downstairs where a vintage black car with leather seats and a quiet engine waited at the curb. The driver nodded once, silent and steady, and pulled away from the curb without any instructions exchanged. They drove through the city in near silence, past the familiar chaos of Midtown, through Central Park where the trees stood bare but proud, and finally toward the edge of the Upper West Side. Harper kept glancing at Kingston, waiting for some clue, but he only watched her, his expression unreadable and patient. "You're being suspiciously quiet," she said. "I'm not hiding anything," he replied. "I'm just waiting for the right moment." "And when is that?" "You'll know." When the car stopped, Harper blinked. They were in front of an old stone building with ivy climbing up its sides, long since browned for the season. The door was already open, a warm glow spilling out onto the sidewalk. Kingston helped her out, his hand steady on her waist. Inside, soft music played, piano, slow and low, and the scent of wood polish and aged paper filled the air. She realized, stunned, that they were in a private library. Not a public one. Not commercial. This was curated, intimate, like stepping into someone's private world. She turned in a slow circle, taking it in. The shelves reached the ceiling, the walls were richwood, and there was a skylight overhead letting in the last of the gray afternoon light. "What is this place?" she asked. Kingston walked toward the center of the room where a single table was set, 2 chairs, a linen cloth, a small vase of white anemones. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. "He left it to my mother, and when she passed, it came to me." Harper blinked, turning to him. "You never told me that." "I never told anyone," he said. "I kept it closed for a long time. I didn't know what to do with it. Until now." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in a velvet cloth. Her stomach flipped. "Harper." She went quiet, heart pounding. "I've been in boardrooms with heads of state. I've negotiated deals that took years to close. I've spoken in front of thousands of people without blinking. But standing here with you, I've never felt more certain or more undone." She took a step closer. "You walked into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone. You challenged my certainty. You made me want things I didn't know I was allowed to want. And you reminded me that love isn't about saving someone, it's about standing beside them when they choose themselves." He opened the velvet cloth. Inside was a ring, elegant, simple, with a single emerald in the center surrounded by a delicate halo of diamonds. "I don't need a perfect life. I just need you in it. Will you marry me?" Harper didn't cry. Not this time. She just nodded once, fiercely, because there were no doubts left. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had always been waiting for her. The library faded away for a moment as he pulled her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. "Do we have to go tell everyone?" she asked after a long moment. "They already know," he said. "I've been impossible to shut up lately." They didn't plan a grand wedding. Instead, they chose a quiet ceremony in the same library. It happened 1 month later, just as winter began to give way to spring. Only their closest friends were there: Lena, her mentor from the studio, the barista who still remembered Harper's name even when she couldn't afford coffee. No press, no spectacle. Harper wore a silk dress the color of cloudlight, and Kingston wore the same gray sweater he'd proposed in. They exchanged vows they wrote themselves, standing between shelves of books that had outlived generations. "I promise to challenge you," Harper said. "To never let you get too comfortable. To always choose truth even when it's hard." "And I promise," Kingston replied, "to listen even when I think I'm right." to give you space without ever stepping away, and to love you for exactly who you are, not who I expect you to be. They sealed it with a kiss that felt like the final piece sliding into place. And just like that, they were no longer Harper Sutton and Kingston O'Neill, two people who happened to collide. They were something new. Something built, not found. Their first home was a brownstone in the West Village, not flashy, but filled with light and the scent of jasmine from the courtyard below. Harper's studio thrived, growing organically as word spread. She hired her first employee, a designer fresh out of art school who reminded her of herself. Kingston scaled back his time at the office, shifting to advisory roles, choosing to build a life instead of just an empire. They kept the cabin in Vermont, returning every season, not for escape but for remembering, for grounding, for quiet. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, when the windows were thrown open and the city spilled in like music, Harper would turn to Kingston and ask, "Did you ever think this was how it would all end up?" He'd pause, then say, "No, it's better." And she'd believe him. Because it was. They had everything they hadn't dared to hope for, not because it had been handed to them, but because they'd met each other with open hands. And they never stopped choosing. Not once. Not even when the world got loud again. Especially not then.